Well, good afternoon YouTube. It's Tony the Lakeland Biker again, and it's the week after the election, and it looks like the BBC's about to be coming in the firing line for Cameron and his mates. Now, the BBC has been criticised by every government we've had, certainly in recent times. So for me, that means that the BBC is actually doing its job, and the BBC is one of Britain's great institutions, because not only is it a trusted news source across the globe, it's also a beacon of hope for many people who live in oppressive regimes. Now, I know a lot of people criticise the BBC because it's funded by the licence fee and everything else, but it's bloody good value for money, really. It costs us, what, £3 a week? That's all. So it costs us a pint a week each. But it's less than that, really, because that's a pint per household. Now, you compare that to, say, Sky or Virgin, it's good value for money. Now, Mr Cameron doesn't like the BBC, but neither does any political party. The Labour Party didn't like the BBC when they were in charge, because the BBC was critical of them. And the Tories don't like the BBC because the BBC is critical of them. The point is, the BBC is an equal offender. It offends all politicians equally. Now, yes, I do know there is a lot of lefties who work for the BBC, but the reason why a lot of lefties work for the BBC is very, very simple. Any extreme right-wingers are more likely to go and work for a commercial company where they're going to get paid more. Simple as that. The BBC is a state-owned, independent media broadcaster, which means it is responsible to the state for the money it spends. So it's not going to pay as highly as the independent companies, but that doesn't affect the quality of its output. The BBC can do both very highbrow programming and incredibly lowbrow programming. So you'll have everything from Strictly Come Dancing to the BBC Proms. Now, I generally listen to Radio 2 and Radio 4. And if there's a particularly interesting concert I want to listen to, Radio 3. I certainly never listen to Radio 1, because I'm a 52-year-old bloke. Radio 1 offers me nothing. But that doesn't mean to say that I don't think Radio 1 has a point. And that's what it boils down to with the rest of the BBC. Now, if Mr Cameron and his mates have his way, now the BBC Charter's up for renewal, I think they're going to want to chop it as tightly as they can. A BBC under the control of the state is no more than a mouthpiece for government policy. An apolitical, independent BBC is able to put forward both sides of an argument. And because they've equally offended the Tories and the Labour Party, they're behaving exactly as the BBC should. So I think the BBC is something worth protecting. Now, internationally, the BBC is one of the very few trusted media resources. And because print media doesn't like it, and Murdoch doesn't like it, doesn't mean to say that the government should chop back on what the BBC does. Because at the end of the day, Rupert Murdoch is not elected by the British people to decide for the British people. You know, he's a bloody colonial whose group of newspapers have been responsible for some of the worst breaches of civil trust of any of the media groups. And personally, I think the man should be up on trial. But of course, our political classes are afraid of him, and afraid of the power that his media empire wields. So what I'm asking you to think about, people, is getting the old pen and paper out, or the email, and writing to your local MP and saying, oi, hands off anti-Beeb. Because as long as our anti-Beeb is upsetting both political classes when they're in government, they're behaving perfectly well. They really got up Labour's nose over the cash for questions and the David Kelly weapons in Iraq issue, and they've also got right up the Tories' nose. So for me, the BBC is fulfilling its charter as being a state-owned, independent observer of what goes on in the United Kingdom, politically and socially. So anyway, really that's all I wanted to say, is the BBC is something we all trust, and therefore is something we should all protect. After all, how many broadcasters will have done that programme on the British motorcycle industry? Or show one about corruption within Canon, the Japanese camera maker? The corruption on the Canon one wouldn't have been shown on ITV because of the amount of advertising that company can wield. With the BBC not being responsible to advertisers for its funding, if an advertiser's doing wrong, the BBC can point it out, and does point it out on a very, very regular basis. So just think about what we'd lose if the government started messing with the BBC. Hi Neil, landlord of the Dungeon Gill. So we would lose an awful lot of our socio-cultural, political world if the BBC got emasculated. And I think we should protect the BBC, because the BBC is something this country should be rightfully proud of. I know I have absolutely no qualms about paying my telly licence every year. When I think how much we have to pay fucking Sky a month, you know, the BBC's more than half the cost of a basic Sky package, and you get a lot more quality for your money. After all, how many other places will put on documentaries on a Friday night about obscure bands and music? Now, some of it I don't watch, but a lot of it I do. I have no interest in gardening, but the BBC does gardening programmes, and so what if it's not showing the latest whiz bang movie? If I want to see the latest whiz bang movie, I'll go to the pictures. What I want to see is good quality programming, and the BBC performs that. So anyhow folks, ride safely, toodle pip.